Heyo, Lloyd Ruhl, aka MegaBlitzz. In today's video, we're going to be ranking the decks for EUIC. With EUIC happening this weekend, I feel like now's a great time to kind of just talk about these decks, put them in a good tier list here. Now, this is all going to be based off of my personal opinion, and it's going to be coming off of my personal testing, what decks I feel like are going to be doing good at EUIC, what the representation of certain decks are going to be like, and all those things kind of jammed into one here. So starting us off with the Roaring Moon Ancient Tribal deck, I'm going to put this down here in tier 2.5. I don't think the deck is that great. I don't think it's bad by any means. However, I just feel like there's a better way to play Roaring Moon EX that hasn't quite been solved yet, and I don't think it's this. Especially with Ancient Box going up here in tier 2, I feel like Ancient Box is just a little bit more consistent than the Roaring Moon EX with Ancient Box package is over this Ancient Box deck here. I feel like Ancient Box has a better time into certain matchups. Sure, playing the Roaring Moon EX does help you into Charizard EX, I feel like, but the Ancient Box deck has the benefit of having a bunch of one prizers, so it's forcing your opponent to take 6 knockouts throughout the game, which that alone in itself can be very beneficial. So going into our Arceus decks here, we got Arc Firebox. Now I will say I've played this deck one time. I'm going to put it down here in tier 2.5. The one time that I did play it, it didn't feel like it was very consistent. I feel like it just hasn't quite been solved yet. I feel like when Arc Firebox is kind of at its full peak, it might become like tier 2, maybe even tier 1.5. I just feel like there's better and more consistent Arceus decks in our current format. Arc Gudra here, going to go in tier 2. Now, Arc Gudra is a very interesting case because I was going to put this in tier 1.5. However, I'm actually going to put it in the top of tier 2 here because I think it is a good deck. I think it could even go into tier 1.5. The thing with Arc Gudra is you are making yourself be this really tanky deck, which is cool. Being able to play Hero's Cape on a Gudra, Rolling Iron makes it so it takes 20 less damage. You have the Moisture Star ability if you want to. However, the problem with Arc Gudra is the fact that you still have a pretty tough time into Charizard. Lost Box decks also are kind of awkward, especially Lost Tina, because they can just Requiem right through your Gudra with Hero's Cape and Rolling Iron buff on top of that. They can just Requiem it and it doesn't even matter. Also, I played Arc Gudra against an Arc Vulpix deck and got absolutely steamrolled because you can't do anything against them. You have to attack with Gudra Vs and Arceus Vs, which feel really, really bad. You could pair it with, I've seen people pairing Arc Gudra with Vulpix themselves, but Arc Vulpix just as a whole is a bit more consistent, which brings me into Arc Vulpix, which I'm actually going to put up here in tier 1.5. I think Arc Vulpix has a pretty good shot at EUIC with Charizard projected to be the most played deck there. I think a lot of people's safe pick is Charizard. So I think Arc Vulpix is a pretty safe counter option going into EUIC. Plus Arc Vulpix has a pretty okay time into other decks as well. Lugia V-Star having an ability on itself, so you're kind of protected from that as well. And then even Goldango, you got Chen Pao and things like that, which can be pretty beneficial. And then we also got Arctina here. I'm going to put Arctina at the top of tier 1.5. I think Arctina is the best Arceus deck you could be playing at EUIC. It has the raw damage output. A lot of people have kind of already figured out Arctina previously about a year and a half ago or so. So Arctina is kind of one of those things where everybody kind of knows what it's trying to do. But with Maximum Belt coming out, that Lost Impact for 280 quickly can become a 330 damage attack against Charizard EXs. I have tested quite a bit with Arctina, and it's definitely on my radar as like one of my go-to pick options for tournaments for sure. So I think Arctina is a pretty good choice as well. But Net Control, I'm going to put this down here in Rogue Bad. I think it could potentially be tier 2.5, but the problem with Banette is I feel like it's just not there yet. People have been pairing it with Gardevoir, which is great. You have a pretty okay time into like Charizard, but the times that I have played like Banette Control or whatever we want to call it, I really struggled against things like Stall. I really struggled against Lugia decks as well, just because shutting off those items for a Lugia deck, especially if they get set up turn 1, doesn't really matter anymore. So moving into our next deck here, we got Bibzard. I'm going to put Bibzard in tier 1.5. As much as I love Bibzard, Bibzard is kind of in a position where it's getting pushed more and more down because Pidgeotzard is just showing to be more consistent, the better option to play, and things like that. Now, the nice thing about Bibzard is if you are expecting a lot of Technical Machine de-evolution in the format at EUIC, Bibzard just naturally helps with that. Playing the Technical Machine evolution to be able to evolve Charmander to Charmeleon and then evolve from Charizard through your hand is really nice. The other cool thing too about Bibzard is the fact that you don't have to rely so much on Rare Candy because of that Technical Machine evolution. Going into Chien-Pao here, I think Chien-Pao absolutely is going to be a tier 1 deck. I think Chien-Pao is a really great pick for EUIC. It's been proving that it is a good competitive deck, especially at local events. It's been proving online. It didn't lose a lot with rotation. You lost Cross Switchers and Battle VIP Pass, and that's about it, really. So now you just play Prime Catcher, which is great. You can even fit a boss in the deck. You can play tech cards like Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking or something like that, because now we don't have these 4 Cross Switchers just clogging up the deck. Something else that's really cool about Chien-Pao with Iron Hands is the fact that with Lugia making a huge comeback and with a good amount of Lost Box decks still being around, you have that Iron Hands as an option to get to pretty easily, actually. I've been playing quite a bit with Chien-Pao as well, and I've seen a good amount of success with it. However, the one problem with Chien-Pao is sometimes when it bricks really hard. However, I feel like it's gotten a lot more consistent since rotation, so that's always nice. Moving into Dialga V-Star here, I think this deck is like bottom of tier 2, maybe top of tier 2.5. I know a lot of people are cooking with Dialga V-Star. I know all kinds of people are like, you know, you can solve it. You got to just figure it out. And I want to believe them, but the problem with Dialga is we're using the Matang, and the one game that I did play with Dialga, maybe 2 games I think, I was like, okay, I need to hit 2 energies off of 2 of these Matangs. That's doable. And I hit 1 off the first one and then whiffed on the second one and I lost. And I was like, yep, that's 8 cards that I looked through and whiffed. That feels really, really bad. So for that reason, I had to put Dialga down here in tier 2. I think Dialga's in a position where once it gets solved, it might become maybe a tier 1.5 deck or maybe a top of the tier 2 deck. But for now, I got to put it down here in the bottom of tier 2 just for the lack of solved reasons. Sprotha EX is going to go down here in Rogue/Bad. I think we are going to see in a Sprotha deck maybe wake its way into day 2. If it hits the right matchups, it has a pretty okay time into Zard. It has a pretty okay time into things like Lugia, I felt like, but you just kind of auto lose to Chien-Pao, which feels really bad. And with Chien-Pao being one of the more prominent decks, more dominant decks or prominent in the format, I feel like it's not the best pick for EUIC. So for that reason, it's got to go down here in the Rogue/Bad category. Now, this Future Box deck is Future Box with like Iron Leaves, and this is Future Hands. So I just wanted to clarify those. Future Box per se, not Future Hands. I think Future Box is like tier 2.5 at best. The amount of times that I've played Future Box, I'm just like, I could just play Future Hands and it just has a better time in a lot of the decks in the meta right now. So Future Box has to go down here in tier 2.5. I just don't think there's a better option that you can play, which is Future Hands, which I'm actually going to put that up here in like the maybe bottom of tier 1.5. The thing with Future Hands is you have a really good time into Lugia, you have a really good time into Lost Box, and you have a pretty okay time into things like Great Tusk Mill or stuff like that. The downside of it, though, is you get absolutely bodied by Charizard when playing Future Hands. Both Bibzard and Pidgeotzard just ruin you, and the deck bricks probably the worst I've ever seen, even worse than Chien-Pao before rotation. The amount of times I've played Future Hands and I'm just like, this hand is really bad, and I sit there for 4 turns and just draw pass and don't do anything is more than I would like to admit out loud. So sorry for all you Future Hand lovers out there. I I think the deck is like bottom of tier 1.5, top of tier 2 at best, if you can hit the right matchups and if you just don't brick. So going into Gardevoir, hot take here, I think Gardevoir is actually a pretty decent deck right now. I'm going to put it right here at the top of tier 2 above Arcudra. I think Gardevoir with Drifloon is a real deck. I don't think Gardevoir is nowhere near as strong as it was with Shining Arcana Gardevoir and stuff. However, I do feel like Gardevoir with Drifloon is a real thing. And I think it's going to catch a lot of people off guard. I could see a Gardevoir deck making top 32, maybe even top 16 potentially, just purely because it can do some crazy damage. Putting a Bravery Charm on that Drifloon, putting a bunch of damage counters on it, playing like Moonlight Hill a little bit, and things like that. I feel like there's a lot of cool options that you can do in Gardevoir that I've been seeing all kinds of different stuff with Gardevoir. I've been seeing people play Moonlight Hill. I've been seeing people play Hero's Cape in the deck. It's been crazy. I love the Gardevoir kitchen that we got going on, and it's been tons of fun to be a part of it. I've been cooking up my own little something with Gardevoir. I don't think it's any better than what anyone else is doing at the moment. It might actually honestly be even worse than what people are doing, but it's still fun nonetheless. So Gardevoir here at the top of tier 2. Goldango, I gotta put it down here in tier 2.5. As much as I love Goldango, I just, after Path to the Peak rotated, which is weird to say out loud, you don't really have any reason to play 4 Worker. I mean, discarding Path to the Peak and then drawing 3 cards was one of Goldango's strong points because you're always able to coin bonus a bunch. But now you're in a position where playing Worker just feels really bad. It feels like you're playing like the how draw 3 cards that you got in like a starter deck. So I think Goldango has potential to do something. I just don't think the 60's there yet. I think it will get there. I could see someone cooking up something with Goldango, maybe going back to the Scizor build that we used to see, and maybe getting into day 2 with it at EUIC. But we'll have to see. Gouging Fire EX. Now, this is a deck I haven't played at all here, so I'm just going to try my hardest to rank this. I'm going to put it like in the middle of tier 2. I know it won a regional at Thailand, but since then, I haven't really seen anything about Gouging Fire. I think it just caught a lot of people off guard and they weren't ready for it, but I feel like Gouging Fire and like a Firebox type deck could become something. I just feel like we're quite far away from that right now, and I feel like someone's going to cook up something for EUIC. I don't think it's going to be well enough to win the entire event. Also, Thailand being a smaller regional, I think also helped Gouging Fire EX's case. I'm also just not a Gouging Fire EX believer, sadly. As much as I love the attack Blaze Blitz, I think is awesome, but Gouging Fire here in tier 2. Lugia, as much as I would love to put this in S tier or tier 1, I gotta put it like at the very top of tier 1.5. The problem with Lugia is you have a horrible time into Chien-Pao. You brick pretty bad a lot of the times, and the other nice part about Lugia is you have a pretty good time into Snorlax Stall. You have a really good time, I feel like, into Charizard, being able to just Cinccino, smack for 330 damage with 5 energy attached. I feel like the thing with Lugia that it has going for it is just its pure raw power. If you can get 2 Archeops in the discard pile, get them both on the bench, and get set up and ready and start attacking, you're more than likely probably going to win the game depending on what the matchup looks like. But the amount of times that I've been playing Lugia, which I've climbed all the way to Master Ball League and TCG Live Ranked Ladder, playing mostly Lugia, I feel like the amount of times I've had to Summoning Star for 1 Archeops and then my opponent just goes boss KO it and I'm like, yep, and I scoop, is a little bit too more often than I would like to admit it is. So for that reason, I have to put it at the top of tier 1.5. But Lugia is a true powerhouse if it can get there, especially in a best of 3 format where you have that one game to kind of just give up. I feel like Lugia is going to be something that we're going to see a lot of, and I feel like it's going to make top 8 at EUIC. Now we got Lost Paradox or just Lost Toolbox. I'm going to put this also in tier 1.5 directly below Lugia. The problem I have with this deck is there's way too many one-ofs. I mean, I know it's a toolbox deck, and I know it's very like matchup dependent on what you're supposed to be keeping. But there has been so many times where I was playing this deck because after rotation, I was like, yeah, Lost Tina's still alive. And then I was like, oh, I'll just try like Lost Toolbox. I played about maybe a dozen games with this deck, and it just felt so clunky and so awkward sometimes. So I feel like the problem with this deck is it's just inconsistent. It's inconsistent. There's a lot of times where you hit a flower selecting and it's like, all right, Roaring Moon and Iron Hands. And I'm like, well, okay, that feels really bad. Take the Iron Hands. And then I end up regretting later on in the game that I wish I would have taken the Roaring Moon instead. So for that reason, I have to put it down here in tier 1.5. I feel like 100% somebody's going to take this deck to the top. They're going to go to top 8 with it. It is a good deck. I just feel like it's a lot of how lucky can I get off these flower selecting sometimes. And I feel like that is what's going to kind of bring it down a little bit. Now we got Lost Tina here. As much as I love Lost Tina, I got to put it at the middle-ish of tier 2. It's nowhere near the powerhouse it was in the previous format, being able to Roxanne Path and climb your way back into games. You still have Roxanne, which is great, but the problem with Lost Tina is the fact that there is just too many things that it's keeping. There's too many things in the format that are keeping it in check. I feel like you have a pretty tough time into Future Hands. You have a pretty awkward time into Arctina, I feel like, as well, the amount of times I've played it. Lugia can kind of get a little weird. Chen Pao feels kind of bad sometimes. You still smoke Stall, which is great. You're doing pretty good into the other Lost Box decks. It just doesn't feel as consistent as you would like it to feel. It's more of like a fast aggro Lost Zone deck than what previous Lost Tina feels like. It's very similar in how it plays, and you're still trying to get to the Lost Impact, 280, but it's really difficult sometimes to get 2 Tina Vs on your bench when playing Lost Tina, it feels like. So for that reason, I got to put it down here in tier 2. It is a good deck, and I definitely think that someone's going to take this to top 16 for sure. I just feel like it's a little inconsistent at the moment. Lost Sablezard, I'm going to put this down here in the bottom of tier 2. I just think Lost Sablezard is one of those decks where when in the right hands, it will go very far. When in someone who is maybe not as evolved with the deck, I feel like it's in a position where it's not going to do as great. It's very difficult to play this deck a lot of the times, especially going into a new format where it's going to be very much everything kind of everywhere, and Lost Sablezard feels like one of those decks where it slots in at certain spots in the format and performs well depending on where the format is at that moment. And I just feel like there's better Lost Box decks to be playing than Lost Sablezard. So Lost Sablezard going to be down here in tier 2. Miraidon. I have been seeing this deck list or just deck lists all over the place for city leagues and stuff. I am not a believer. I'm sorry. But I will say I think it has some potential. I do think that losing Flaffy hurts this deck more than anything. Losing Path feels bad. Losing the Turbo P&E version feels bad. However, you can still play a Turbo type variant with it with double turbos and heavy electric energy count with electric generators in the deck as well. So I'm going to put this deck here at the top of tier 2.5. I hit a couple on the ladder the other day, and I was like, man, this deck kind of has potential. And then they took 3 prize cards against me and then bricked the rest of the game. And I was like, yep, there's Miraidon. So for that reason, I got to put it down here in tier 2.5. It's got a lot of gas if it can go really fast and really quickly and win very quickly. However, the moment you get put in a position where you have to take a couple single prize knockouts, you kind of just sputter out and it feels really bad. So down here in tier 2.5. Now this is like the Pidgeot control version. I don't know if this is like the Snorlax Pidgeot, but I'm going to call this the Snorlax Pidgeot version. I actually think this deck is tier 1. Genuinely, Stall with like Pidgeot EX, Luxray, and Bouffalant is a real thing. You have a great time into Charizard. You have a great time into Chen Pao. But you lose to a lot of the other decks being Lugia, Lost Box decks, Future Hands I feel like is pretty okay into Stall with Pidgeot because you're able to just like boss up Pidgeot amp it, take 3 prize cards, and you're KOing their quick searcher, which is really good. So for that reason, it's kind of tough, but with Chien-Pao and both Charizard variants being so popular and so, like, just dominant right now, I feel like Stall has a really good chance at EUIC to make it to top 8, even potentially win the event as well. Snorlax Stall here. I'm going to be calling this the Stall version with, like, Chi-Yu and stuff. I think it's, like, tier 1, somewhere maybe in the middle here. I think it's okay, and I think it's a good deck for sure. I just feel like the better variant is like the Stall with Pidgeot. That's kind of it, really. Anytime I play Stall, I'm like, man, I should play Stall with Chi-Yu, and I'm like, wait, I can just play Stall with like Pidgeot, and that's kind of it. So for that reason, I got to put it down here in tier 1.5. I think it is a good deck, and I think you still have really great matchups into a lot of things, but I just think that Stall with Pidgeot EX is just better. Charizard Pidgeot EX. I'm going to put this here at the top of tier 1. Scoot over Chien-Pao. Charizard with Pidgeot EX is the most popular deck in the format. It's probably the most powerful deck in the format. You could even argue that a lot of the times it's probably the most consistent deck in the format. You just really have to dodge Stall. Genuinely, Charizard has a really good time into a lot of these matchups. Chien-Pao feels pretty like 50-50, maybe 55-45. Lugia's same way, 55-45 or 50-50. Lost Box decks are like 50-50. Arctina's like 50-50. And the reason of that is because, yes, the Maximum Belt does help into Charizard. However, they just set up another Charizard and KO the thing that has Maximum Belt on it. And I have done that a lot of times playing Pidgeot Zard. Also, I've just been teching 1 Lost Vacuum in my Pidgeot Zard deck to remove Maximum Belts from my opponent's Pokemon. So Charizard Pidgeot has a lot of options that it can fit in the deck to adapt to the format, and just being a complete raw powerhouse right now. Path to the Peak being gone doesn't keep Quick Search or Infernal Rain in check anymore, so you're able to Quick Search almost every single turn to go find 1 card of whatever you want is so good. Raging Bolt, I'm going to put this in tier 2.5. I don't think Raging Bolt's that great. There's been Raging Bolt with Palkia, there's been Raging Bolt with Gardevoir, and I'm just not a believer. I've been playing Raging Bolt with Gardevoir a little bit, and I think it's okay. I just don't think it's a great pick for EUIC. If you're going to play something with Gardevoir package, just play Gardevoir. If you're going to be playing something with, like, Palkia, just play Goldengo. I feel like that's even in a better position than Raging Bolt with Palkia V-Star. Great Tusk Mill. Now, I have been playing Great Tusk Mill a little bit more lately, and the more I play it, the more I think this deck is actually okay. I'm going to put it in tier 2. Now, I'm going to put it in the middle of tier 2, and the reason why is because the times that I have played Great Tusk Mill, and I'm able to play an Ancient Supporter every turn, or most turns, and get a land collapse going almost every single turn, feels really good. Also, with 4 Arceus decks being pretty relevant in the format, you're able to actually attack with Great Tusk, and it makes sense, because Arceus is weak to fighting, so Giant Tusk does 160 damage, times that by 2 is 320, you're KOing Arceus V-Stars, which feels pretty good. I played a Great Tusk Mill deck. I was playing Great Tusk the other day against an Arceus deck, and I won by taking prize cards because it's something you can do. So there we are for our tier list here. Let me know down in the comments if you guys agree, what deck you're playing if you were to go to EUIC. If you are going to EUIC, what deck are you playing? What deck you're playing right now, or anything of that nature. Alrighty, let's jump right in to that outro. Alrighty, that's gonna do it for today's video. If you guys are enjoying the content I've been making stuff for here on the channel, don't forget to leave a like, smash that subscribe button. I really would appreciate it. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace!